How does a young British woman go from teaching English in Japan to being found buried in a bathtub of sand on a stranger's balcony? What really happened behind those locked doors? And why did it take years to catch the man responsible? This isn't just a murder case. It's a chilling descent into obsession, evasion, and a justice system pushed to its limits. Stay with us as we unravel the haunting story of Lindsay Ann Hawker, a case that gripped two nations and left the world asking, how did he almost get away with it? She was bright, kind, and full of promise. Lindsay Ann Hawker was born on December 30, 1984, in Coventry, England, to her loving parents, Bill and Julia Hawker. The eldest of three daughters, Lindsay grew up in a warm and supportive household in the town of Brandon, Warwickshire. From a young age, she showed signs of compassion and intelligence that made her stand out. She had a natural curiosity about the world, an easy smile, and a heart that beat with empathy for others. Her parents described her as a gentle soul, someone who wanted to help people, explore different cultures, and understand the world beyond her own. Lindsay attended King Henry VIII School in Coventry, where she quickly excelled both academically and socially. Her teachers praised her for her dedication and calm confidence. She wasn't loud or attention-seeking, but she had a quiet charm that drew people in. Friends described her as grounded and sincere, someone who made others feel seen and heard. She had a passion for literature, languages, and the arts, and those interests only deepened as she grew older. Her love for understanding people and cultures eventually led her to the University of Leeds, where she studied biology. Though science may seem a sharp contrast to her empathetic nature, Lindsay saw it as a way to help people, perhaps through teaching or global outreach. But there was another side to Lindsay, a deeply adventurous spirit. While many of her peers stayed close to home, she dreamed of traveling far, of immersing herself in new places and meeting people from all walks of life. This dream became a reality after she graduated with honors in 2006. Eager to gain new experiences and support herself, Lindsay decided to teach English in Japan. It was a bold decision, but not out of character for someone so thoughtful and courageous. She joined the Nova Language School and moved to Tokyo, one of the busiest and most vibrant cities in the world. For Lindsay, it was a fresh chapter, one filled with culture, challenge, and independence. In Tokyo, she adjusted to life with remarkable ease. She made friends quickly, both with fellow expats and locals. Her students admired her patience and clarity, and she often stayed after class to help those who needed extra support. Lindsay had begun documenting her journey through letters and conversations with her family, who remained incredibly proud of her. She shared stories of the beauty of Japan, the cherry blossoms, the polite culture, the exciting pace of life, but also the loneliness that sometimes crept in. She was honest about the isolation that came with living abroad, but she never let it dull her sense of purpose. Despite the challenges, Lindsay embraced her new life fully. She lived in a modest apartment in Ichikawa, Chiba Prefecture, and spent her free time exploring temples, cafes, and city streets. She was finding herself in this foreign land, growing stronger, wiser, and even more compassionate with each passing day. Her parents were scheduled to visit her in just a few months, and she was excited to show them everything she had come to love. But what no one could foresee was that her journey, so full of hope and potential, would soon be cut short in the most unthinkable way. It was March 25, 2007, a chilly Sunday evening in Tokyo, when the vibrant life of Lindsay Hawker was brutally taken away. The events leading to her final moments began just days earlier when she encountered a man named Tatsuya Ichihashi. He had approached her outside a train station, claiming to be one of her students and requesting a private English lesson. Lindsay, ever polite and professional, hesitated but eventually agreed to meet with him, setting the scene for what would become one of Japan's most haunting modern crimes. On that fateful Sunday, Lindsay met Ichihashi at a cafe. CCTV footage would later capture her walking alongside him, calm, trusting, and unaware that she was stepping into the final hours of her life. What unfolded next remains one of the darkest, most chilling sequences of deception and violence. Ichihashi lured Lindsay back to his apartment in the city of Ichikawa, just outside Tokyo. She may have believed it was part of their arranged lesson. But once inside, the atmosphere shifted. The bright city beyond the walls of his apartment faded into the background as Lindsay found herself trapped in a place no longer safe. The timeline is grim. Sometime after entering that apartment, Lindsay was overpowered, bound, and brutally assaulted. Forensic reports would later reveal she had been beaten and strangled. Her last moments were likely filled with fear and confusion, far from the family and life she loved so dearly. The apartment was small, but it became the setting of unspeakable horror. Ichihashi, in a calculated attempt to conceal his crime, purchased a large bathtub and filled it with sand and compost. He placed Lindsay's lifeless body inside and tried to decompose it using chemicals, as if he could erase her existence. For 2 days he stayed in that apartment with her body, shopping for supplies, continuing with normal routines, even as Lindsay's remains lay hidden in plain sight. It was a grotesque mix of calm and chaos, a predator living beside the evidence of his own monstrous act. Meanwhile, Lindsay's friends and coworkers began to grow concerned when she failed to show up for work. She was known for her punctuality, her reliability. Alarm bells rang quickly. Her flatmates contacted the British Embassy, and local authorities were alerted. The investigation moved fast. Using clues from her last known whereabouts and the student's name she had given, police traced her final steps to Ichihashi's apartment building. On the evening of March 26, investigators arrived at the building and knocked on his door. Ichihashi answered but didn't speak. In a sudden flash of panic, he bolted past them and escaped, barefoot, down the stairs, disappearing into the city streets. What he left behind was a scene no one could prepare for. Inside his apartment, officers made the horrifying discovery. Hidden on the balcony inside the makeshift bathtub was Lindsay Hawker's naked body, partially decomposed, surrounded by sand, soil, and chemical solutions. The brutality was undeniable. The sight was shocking. The apartment was filled with a disturbing silence, broken only by the buzzing of city life outside, oblivious to the horror that had occurred within. The crime sent waves of grief across Japan and back home to the UK, where Lindsay's family received the devastating news. Their daughter, who had traveled the world with hopes of teaching and growing, had met a violent end in a stranger's apartment. The question now burned in everyone's mind: who was this man, and why had he done this? But for the moment, all that remained was sorrow, disbelief, and a deep sense of injustice. The investigation into Lindsay Hawker's murder unfolded under an intense glare of public outrage and international pressure. The sheer brutality of the crime, combined with the suspect's sudden escape, triggered a massive manhunt across Japan. In the hours after the gruesome discovery of Lindsay's body, the police had one clear name and face: Tatsuya Ichihashi. He had vanished like smoke the moment authorities knocked on his apartment door, slipping away barefoot into the Tokyo night. But the evidence he left behind was damning. Inside his apartment, investigators uncovered a chaotic scene, a mix of everyday life and meticulous concealment. Lindsay's belongings were still present: her bag, her identification, and her clothes. There were receipts and surveillance footage linking Ichihashi to hardware stores, where he'd bought the materials used to hide her body. The signs were unmistakable. This was not an impulsive act of violence. It was premeditated, calculated, and horrifying. Witness accounts began to emerge, offering disturbing glimpses into Ichihashi's behavior. The barista from the cafe where Lindsay had met him recalled that she seemed composed but slightly uneasy. Her friends later confirmed she had spoken of him briefly, saying he was persistent and odd. Other women came forward, describing uncomfortable encounters with a man matching his description, approaches on the street, requests for English lessons, and strange behavior that they had dismissed at the time. The picture forming around Ichihashi was of a man with deep-seated obsessions, one who blurred the lines between fantasy and violence. Police profilers began to build a psychological portrait of the fugitive. He was 28 years old at the time of the murder, intelligent and educated, the son of a wealthy and respected doctor. He had attended an elite high school and briefly enrolled in university but never graduated. Those who knew him described him as quiet and aloof, someone who kept to himself and rarely made eye contact. But behind that withdrawn persona, police believed, was a deeply disturbed mind, possibly fueled by rejection, entitlement, and a desire to control. The attack on Lindsay was likely not spontaneous. It was a fantasy that had been building, meticulously planned and horrifically carried out. The evidence only deepened the mystery. DNA samples, fingerprints, and trace materials all confirmed Lindsay had fought back. She had struggled in her final moments, a chilling sign of her courage even in the face of terror. Police believed the murder had occurred shortly after she arrived at the apartment, and Ichihashi had gone to disturbing lengths to dispose of her body. Surveillance from nearby stores, travel routes, and phone records painted a timeline that pointed to a man trying to erase his presence while hiding in plain sight. The Japanese public, often unaccustomed to such brutal crimes involving foreigners, was shaken. The media followed every development, and the British government pressed Japanese authorities for action. Posters of Ichihashi's face flooded train stations, convenience stores, and airports. A reward was announced. But even with the weight of the law behind them, authorities were chasing a ghost. Ichihashi, once a quiet man in the shadows, had become Japan's most wanted fugitive. And for Lindsay's grieving family, the horror was not just in the loss. It was in knowing her killer had simply vanished into the crowd, leaving behind nothing but silence and a desperate, burning question: when would justice catch up to him? For over 2 years, Tatsuya Ichihashi remained a phantom, one of Japan's most elusive fugitives. His face, once just another in the crowd, became infamous, printed on wanted posters across the nation. Yet despite the intense media attention and a mounting international outcry, he managed to stay hidden. His escape had been both audacious and calculated. He cut his own hair, avoided digital footprints, and drifted from city to city, surviving off menial jobs and anonymity. But beneath the surface, he was undergoing a slow, eerie transformation, not just in appearance, but in identity. Obsessed with evading justice, Ichihashi took drastic measures. He used crude tools and even performed self-surgery to alter his facial features, cutting off moles, reshaping his nose, and changing the contours of his face to dodge recognition. The man who once fled barefoot from his apartment was now a ghost in a new shell. The breakthrough came in November 2009, when police received a tip from staff at a construction company in Osaka. A quiet, solitary man had been working there under a false name, exhibiting strange behavior and refusing to engage socially. He matched Ichihashi's general build, but his face looked different. Still, something about him unsettled his co-workers. As suspicion grew, the company handed over discarded items that might carry his fingerprints. Investigators moved cautiously, analyzing the prints and comparing them with those found in Ichihashi's apartment back in 2007. The results were conclusive. It was him. The hunt that had gripped a nation was about to reach its final act. Knowing they had only one chance, law enforcement launched a precise and silent operation. They tracked him to a ferry terminal in Osaka, where he was planning to board a boat bound for Okinawa, another move to vanish into a remote part of Japan. On November 10, 2009, officers closed in. Dressed plainly, they approached him with deliberate calm, not wanting to alert him, or the public. When they called his name, Ichihashi, he hesitated. The mask he had worn for years began to slip. He didn't run. There was no violent outburst. Instead, in the quiet tension of that moment, he simply surrendered. The man who had evaded justice for 31 months was finally in handcuffs. As he was taken into custody, the weight of what he had done seemed to settle on his shoulders. But there was no apology, no immediate confession, just silence. His arrest sent shockwaves through Japan and across the world. News outlets flashed his image, now unmistakable again despite the altered face. The British public, Lindsay's family, and millions who had followed the case finally had a name to tie to the pain: Tatsuya Ichihashi, captured and awaiting trial. For the detectives who had pursued him across years and cities, it was a moment of grim satisfaction, but justice had only just begun. The trial began in July 2011, held at the Chiba District Court. Courtrooms were packed with journalists and spectators, each face marked by a mixture of sorrow and curiosity. Lindsay's parents, Bill and Julia Hawker, traveled from England to be present, their grief still raw, their resolve unshaken. Ichihashi sat in silence as prosecutors described in harrowing detail how he had lured Lindsay into his apartment, held her captive, beat her, and eventually strangled her to death. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA, surveillance footage, receipts, and his own written account found in a memoir he had penned during his time on the run, in which he detailed his guilt and the struggle of evading police. The memoir, disturbing in tone, painted him as a man more obsessed with escape than remorse. On July 21, 2011, the verdict was delivered. Tatsuya Ichihashi was found guilty on all major charges. The court rejected any suggestion of spontaneity or accidental death, instead ruling that the murder was brutal and deliberate. The judge called it extremely selfish and heinous, and sentenced him to life imprisonment. There was no possibility of a quick release. Ichihashi would spend the rest of his days behind bars. As the sentence was read aloud, Lindsay's parents held each other tightly, tears streaming down their faces, not in triumph, but in solemn recognition that justice had finally arrived, even if it could never bring their daughter home. Lindsay Hawker's story is not just the account of a brutal crime, it is a haunting reminder of the fragility of safety, the unpredictability of evil, and the enduring strength of those left behind. A young woman filled with kindness, ambition, and dreams, taken in a moment of cruelty that defies understanding. Her life was stolen in a foreign land, by a man who thought he could bury the truth in silence and shadows. But truth has a way of resurfacing. Justice, though delayed, caught up with the one who ran. And yet, we are left with more questions than answers. How does someone walk among us, appearing harmless, while harboring such darkness within? Could anything have prevented this tragedy? And in a world that often forgets the names behind the headlines, how do we make sure Lindsay Hawker is remembered not for how she died, but for how she lived? We must ask ourselves, what does justice truly look like? Is life behind bars ever enough for the loss of a life so full of light? And how do families, like Lindsay's, wake up each morning knowing a piece of their world is missing? These are not easy questions, and maybe they're not meant to have easy answers. But in remembering Lindsay, in speaking her name, and in telling her story with care and truth, we ensure she is never forgotten. We stand witness, not just to the horror of her death, but to the quiet power of her life. So, to you watching this now, what do you take away from Lindsay's story? Is it fear, anger, sadness, or perhaps a deeper awareness of the world we live in? What responsibility do we carry, as individuals and as a society, to protect one another? The story is over, but its echo remains.